Welcome to AHSC TV's weekly roundup. 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced physical or sexual violence. About 120 million girls have been raped or sexually assaulted at some point in their lives. Of all women killed in 2012, intimate partners or family members killed almost half. In honor of the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Violence against Women 2014, which was observed on Wednesday, November 25th, this week's program focuses on stories relating to women's rights. In Indonesia, female police recruits are humiliated and traumatized by unnecessary and invasive virginity tests. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, the men that raped and murdered 14-year-old student Darlene Jane Las Piñas have yet to face justice. Data from Nepal shows that reports of violence against women are on the rise. Next, Indian human rights worker Ranjeeta Sadokpam meets HSC TV on set to speak about her work in Manipur. Finally, we reveal statistics for Pakistan, notorious for denying rights for women. Welcome to AHSC TV's weekly roundup, International Day for the Elimination of Violence against Women edition. I'm Josefina Bergsten. Female police recruits in Indonesia are required to undertake a battery of medical examinations that leave them humiliated, traumatized, and even in pain. For decades, the police of Indonesia have required female police recruits to undergo a virginity test under the auspices of an obstetrics and gynecological exam as part of a broader assessment of the applicant's health. The virginity test is not specifically mentioned as a requirement, and in 2010, after numerous complaints, the head of police personnel at the time agreed to abolish the test. Nevertheless, virginity tests are still widely conducted. Rights groups and critics of the test point out that no similar examination exists for men, and that the test appears to be a tool devised to discriminate against women by either discouraging them from applying to the police force or creating an inappropriate means to disqualify them. Some sources claim that the test is an attempt to identify and disqualify women with loose morals, though there is no corresponding test for male members of the force. This is supported by the expectation that female police officers are to remain single and unmarried for the first few years in service. Human Rights Watch claim that the practice violates the principles of Indonesia's national police itself. Policewomen have made organized efforts throughout the last 3 decades to end the practice. Most recently, they obtained a verbal agreement in 2010 that the tests would be abolished. A simple executive order could put an end to the practice immediately, but the authorities have taken no action. All of this concludes that the virginity test is discriminatory, harmful, and violates the rights of women looking to serve their country. In the Philippines, earlier this year, a 14-year-old high school student was raped and murdered. Today, AHSC TV brings you details of the story and speaks with Abina Rombawa, Executive Director of the Moro Women's Center, about the current status of the case. On June 15 this year, 14-year-old Darlene Jane Las Piñas' rotting body was found in Malungon 2 days after she'd gone missing. It was the pet dog of a neighboring family that first made the discovery, despite the body having been left exposed in an open hole. Suspects Ronnie Serrano and Boyax Narciso were seen forcibly dragging Darlene Jane by her neck to a car by the roadside. Both suspects were also present while the police were investigating the crime scene. Narciso, a former member of the village council, owns a funeral home that law enforcement have been known to consult. In this case, Narciso proposed to the police to pour petrol on the putrid remains, an act which would have compromised the evidence. Subsequently, a witness to Darlene's abduction identified the 2 men to the police. Serrano was subsequently arrested. However, Narciso has eluded the police and remained at large. 3 months later, when the Asian Human Rights Commission issued an urgent appeal on the case, there had been no developments and no prosecution. Earlier this week, HLC TV checked in with Abina Rambawa, Executive Director of the Moro Women's Center, who is following the case closely.
So about Darling cases, until now there is no justice for her because the rapist or the killer, let us say killer and rapist, still outside of the jail. Actually, we are now helping the Moro women, also helping the parents and with the Asian Human Rights Commission. But it because the parents now is lack of knowledge how to get the data or how to follow up in the court. So we are now facilitating this case, but still the case is running slowly. So the situation in the Philippines is at present it is rampant of human rights violation, especially the violence against women.
The death of Darlene and its impact on her parents, Darwin and Lorgina, is tragic. However, it is the failure of the system to provide justice and closure that is inexcusable. And now turning to Nepal. Reports of violence against women are on the rise in Nepal. Despite the increasing violence against women, the state has been unwilling and unable to take any meaningful action. The Asian Human Rights Commission has reported on sexual violence where women's ages range from 3 years old to 80 years old. In most of these cases, women suffer sexual and domestic violence from the hands of their families and close relatives. A significant problem is that the justice mechanism does little to help female victims. When women try to register cases at the police station, they are discouraged and told to settle their issues at home and in their village. And investigators often question victims of rape in a manner that lacks the required sensitivity. These problems deter women from seeking justice. For a local analysis of women's issues in Nepal, AHLC TV speaks to advocate Mandira Sharma.
As you see, the violence against women in Nepal is increasing. There are increasing number of reporting. One could argue that maybe the reporting of the violence against women have been improved. That's why the incidences have come into light and it's increasing. But overall, I could argue that violence against women is increasing because of the lack of rule of law and impunity for the perpetrators of these kind of violations. Even to register their complaint in demand of investigations, they have to agitate. Simply, the FIRs have been refused to be registered. Forget about investigations and bringing those into justice. I think overall situation of women from political perspectives, for example, women's representations in the politics has been improved a little bit, though it is not as compared to the past Constituent Assembly. But overall representations of women in the public spheres have not been improved despite the firm commitment that previous Constituent Assembly made. Similarly, the denial of justice remains a major challenge for women in improving their overall security. The continuous denial of the state to address conflict-era crimes of sexual violence is another challenge. I think in overall, though there has been national action plan, a lot of commitments, we still need to do a lot in terms of putting those commitments into action.
We now turn to our guest in the studio, Ranjeeta Sadokpam, who is a human rights worker from Manipur. Welcome, Ranjeeta.
Thank you so much.
Tell us about your work in Manipur.
I work in a human rights organization called Human Rights Alert in Manipur in India. So we work different violations of human beings in my state. Especially we focus on torture, extrajudicial killings, and also extrajudicial killings victims, mothers and wives.
How do these women come together and form their own organization?
Yeah, it was in 2009, July 11th. All the victims, they came up together in one of the victims' place, and they decided that enough is enough, because in past 2006 to 2009 there have been lots of extrajudicial killing happened in my state. So all the victims came together in one platform, and on that day they formed this organization called Extrajudicial Execution Victims Family Association Manipur, which is also called IFAM, was formed.
Do you want to say anything about the Armed Forces Special Powers Act
Yeah.
in relation to these women?
Whatever today we see suffer like mothers suffering, widows, and lots of children. It's because of this black law called Armed Forces Special Powers Act. So unless and until if the government is not repealing this act, it will continue. But it's a high time to think, from the government of India to repeal this act. Otherwise, in future, any woman in my state, they don't want to see more widows and more orphan children to increase in the population of Manipur.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the kind of discrimination these women face?
I can talk in the two different types of discrimination. After they kill their son and husband, from the government side they branded as a terrorist. So right after the death of their husband or son, normally people think that and it's a terrorist. So the stigma being a terrorist wife in the society is very difficult, and also lots of discriminate from the government so-called concerned department, where lots of schemes about widows and lots of welfare schemes which these victims are not getting. On the other side, being a patriarchal society in Manipur, we have lots of when a woman become young widows, we have lots of taboos, do and don'ts. You can't wear jewelry, and lots of people, it's always a problem, to become a widow in a young age, and people hardly understand their problems. Even the family, from the family side, there are lots of cases like discrimination cases within the groups, and it's really difficult being a young widows and live in our own, so-called patriarchal society.
What are these women able to do to maintain like a positive attitude in their fight?
I can see lots of positive things in personally in my own view. Like in the beginning in 2009 when they came up together in the early days, they were so emotional, they were so small, it's like it's end of the world. But after taking meeting up regularly every month, and every second Saturday they have a meeting and sharing everything, all the surroundings, all the happiness of their own life. So from the individual to collective. So when they become more collective, they started thinking about livelihood, then about children, and about getting justice. That's why in 2012 this group filed a case about all the killings, so-called encounter killings, which had happened from since 1979 to 2012. Cases in total cases is like 1,528 cases to investigate all the cases. So I think this is the positive work.
And what needs to change for the future to create a better Manipur?
We need to be really strong enough. We have to give lots of empower to them so that they can fight and they can stand for their own rights. And the most important is they have to have a kind of patience where they have to think about getting justice. They have lots of hope to Supreme Court of India, thinking that one day they will get justice to one of the highest court in the India democracy country like India, where they petition to the highest court, Indian Supreme Court. So we do have lots of hopes in the future.
Thank you, Ranjeeta, for your time in the studio.
Thank you so much.
In our last story this week, we examined data on gender violence in Pakistan. Violence against women is a major factor in Pakistan's low rating on the Gender Empowerment Scale. According to a 2011 Thomson Reuters Foundation study, Pakistan is the third most dangerous country for women in the world. In a contemporary statement, a Pakistani Human Rights Commission report stated that more than 1,000 women and girls are murdered in honor killings every year, and 90% of Pakistani women suffer from domestic violence. In addition to physical and sexual violence and honor killings, forced marriages and structural inequalities within the society make Pakistan one of the worst countries in terms of gender equality. Statistics provided by the Ministry of Interior show that more than 14,583 rape cases have been registered in the country in the last 5 years, but only 1,041 of the accused rapists have been convicted in court, or 7% of the cases. Violence against women in urban areas is increasing significantly, closing the gap with rural areas where violence against women remains widespread. Out of the 421 cases, 197 were reported in the urban areas. This dismal situation, in the presence of numerous laws designed to end such violence, shows the danger faced by women in Pakistan today. These laws include Women Protection Act, Acid Control and Crime Act, Protection Against Harassment at Workplace Act, Law of Inheritance, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Additionally, structural bias in the justice systems, particularly the traditional police attitude and a complex judicial system, are significant obstacles preventing women from reporting attacks. That is all for this edition of HRC TV's Weekly Roundup. For more on these and other topics, please visit www.humanrights.asia. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.